The massive Zephyrian warship Death's Edge drifted through the dark space near the human colony world of New Texas. Admiral Kextar stood on the bridge, his forearms crossed, as he studied the data streaming across the holographic displays. His blue-scaled skin reflected the light from the screens, and his yellow eyes showed nothing but contempt. "These humans are weak," he said to his intelligence officer, Commander Yathara. "Look at their ships. Small, poorly armed, and they have only been traveling between stars for 50 of their years." Commander Yathara shifted nervously on her 6 legs. She had been studying the human species for months now, and something worried her. "Admiral, the old records from the Galactic Council mention something about these Terrans. It says we should be careful with them." Kextar's laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. "The Galactic Council is full of old fools who fear shadows. We have conquered 6 different species in the last 10 years. The Borathi tried to fight us with their plasma weapons. The Kendari had ships twice the size of human vessels. All of them fell before our might." He turned to face the tactical display showing human space. Red dots marked human colonies, trade routes, and patrol ships. To Kextar, they looked like easy targets waiting to be taken. "Sir," Yathara tried again, "the records specifically warn about harming human civilians. They say something about a rule the humans follow, something about pursuing enemies to the edge of existence." "Propaganda." Kextar waved one of his hands dismissively. "Fear tactics from a species that knows it. Cannot win in direct combat. Look at them, Yathara. They send small convoys with minimal protection through space that belongs to no one. They build farms on worlds with weak defenses. They are prey animals pretending to be predators." Meanwhile, 3 light years away, Captain Jake Morrison sat in the command chair of the Earth Defense Ship Ranger. The ship was not impressive by galactic standards. It measured only 400 meters long, carried a crew of 180, and its weapons were based on human technology that most alien species considered primitive. Jake was reading the morning reports when Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez approached his chair. She was young, maybe 25, with dark hair pulled back in a regulation ponytail. Her face showed concern. "Captain, we're getting strange sensor readings from the outer system," she said, handing him a data pad. "Chief Collins thinks we might have visitors." Chief Engineer Pete Collins climbed up from the lower deck, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He was an older man, maybe 50, with gray hair and the kind of calm that came from 30 years. "In space. It's not natural, Captain," Pete said. "The gravitational distortions are too regular. Something big is moving out there, trying to stay hidden." Jake studied the data. The patterns showed ships, probably several of them, conducting what looked like surveillance operations. "How long have they been watching us?" "At least 3 days, maybe more," Amy replied. "They're good at hiding, but our new sensor array is better than what most people expect." Jake nodded. First contact protocols existed for situations like this, but something felt wrong. If these aliens wanted to make peaceful contact, why hide in the dark? Why watch human colonies from a distance? "Send a message to Earth Command," Jake ordered. "Tell them we have possible alien contact in the New Texas system. Request instructions." But Earth Command was 6 days away by fastest courier ship. Whatever was happening here would be decided long before help could arrive. Back on the Death's Edge, Admiral Kextar was growing impatient. His fleet had been watching human activity for days, mapping their patrol routes and defense positions. The humans were pathetically predictable. Their supply ships followed the same routes at the same times. Their patrol ships moved in simple, patterns that a child could anticipate. "Admiral," his weapons officer reported, "human convoy approaching the jump point. 3 cargo ships and 1 escort vessel." Kextar smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. This would be the perfect test. Destroy a few human ships, show them who controlled this region of space, and watch them run back to their home world like frightened. "Animals! Target the convoy!" he ordered. "Destroy them all!" The Death's Edge dropped its stealth field and accelerated toward the human ships. 2 other Zephyrian vessels followed, their weapons charging with deadly energy. Captain Morrison felt his heart sink as the alien ships appeared on his screens. The Ranger was 20 minutes away from the convoy, too far to help. He watched helplessly as 3 massive alien vessels, each one larger than anything in the human fleet, closed in on the defenseless cargo ships. "Get me a channel to the convoy," Jake ordered. "Captain Harris, this is the Ranger," Jake's voice crackled through space. "You have 3 large alien vessels approaching your position. I recommend immediate evasive action." Captain Harris of the cargo ship Prairie Wind responded quickly. "We see them, Ranger. Our escort is moving to intercept, but Jake, these ships are huge." The human escort ship Guardian was a small vessel, designed to fight pirates and smugglers, not alien warships. Its captain, Commander Lisa Park, knew she was facing impossible odds, but she also knew her duty. "Prairie Wind, get your people to the escape pods," she transmitted. "I'll buy you as much time as I can." The Guardian fired its missiles and energy, weapons at the lead Zephyrian ship. The weapons struck the alien vessel's shields and barely registered on their sensors. In response, the Zephyrians fired once. The Guardian exploded in a ball of fire that lit up the darkness of space. Admiral Kextar watched with satisfaction as the small human warship died. "Too easy," he said. "Now finish the cargo ships." The AS. 3 human cargo vessels tried to run, but they were designed for carrying supplies, not speed. The Zephyrian ships caught them easily and destroyed them one by one. 847 human civilians died in the space of 10 minutes. Captain Morrison arrived too late to save anyone. The Ranger found only wreckage and the fading heat signatures of destroyed ships. Among the debris, they recovered one thing: the Guardian's final transmission. "This is Commander Park to any human vessel," the recording said. "We are under attack by alien forces. 3 large warships, unknown configuration. They showed no interest in communication or surrender. Tell Earth that we did our duty." Jake stood on his bridge, staring at the empty space where 847 people had been alive an hour before. His crew was quiet, processing what they had witnessed. These aliens had not tried to communicate. They had not demanded surrender. They had simply killed nearly 1,000 humans and left. "Amy," Jake said quietly, "send a message to Earth Command. Priority Alpha. Tell them we're at war." But what Captain Morrison didn't know was that this attack would awaken something in humanity that the galaxy had never seen before. The Zephyrians had just broken the one rule that every species learned eventually: never harm Earth's people, because humans will pay any price to make you regret it. The war had been going for 6 weeks when Admiral Lisa Carter launched Operation Payback. Every human ship in the galaxy received the same message at the same time: hunt them down, make them pay, show no mercy. Captain Susan Blake read the orders aboard the Wolverine as her ship drifted in the shadow of an asteroid field. Her crew had been hitting Zephyrian supply lines for days, and the strain was showing on their faces. But when she announced the new operation, something changed in their eyes. The hunt was about to begin. "Ben," she said to her first officer. How many Zephyrian supply ships passed through this system last week? Commander Ben Taylor checked his data pad. 7, Captain. All carrying weapons and ammunition to their forward bases. Then they'll send more, Susan said. We'll be waiting. 3 systems away, the Zephyrian cargo vessel Heavy Burden moved slowly through space, protected by 2 escort ships. The cargo hold was filled with energy cells for the fleet's weapons systems. Without these supplies, the Zephyrian war effort would grind to a halt. Captain Vorthak commanded the lead escort. He was a veteran warrior who had fought in 12 campaigns, but he had never faced an enemy like the humans. They appeared from nowhere, struck like lightning, and vanished before his guns could target them. "Keep scanning," he ordered his crew. "The humans are out there somewhere." He was right. The Wolverine hung motionless behind a small moon, its engines cold and its weapons powered down. Susan Blake watched the Zephyrian convoy approach through her ship's passive sensors. "All hands, battle stations," she whispered into her communication system. "Remember, we're not here to fight fair. We're here to win." The attack came without warning. The Wolverine burst from behind the moon at full speed, its missiles already in flight. The first Zephyrian escort exploded before its shields could activate. The cargo ship tried to run, but human missiles were faster than Zephyrian engines. Captain Vorthak had just enough time to send a distress signal before the Wolverine's guns tore his ship apart. In less than 5 minutes, 3 Zephyrian vessels were destroyed, and their cargo was drifting in pieces through space. But this attack was different from the earlier raids. When Zephyrian reinforcements arrived an hour later, they found something that chilled them to their core. Painted on a piece of wreckage in human letters were the words, 847, we remember. Admiral Kextar received the report in his command center. The loss of another supply convoy was bad enough, but the message the humans had left behind was worse. It showed that this wasn't just about military strategy. This was personal. "How many supply ships have we lost this week?" he asked Commander Yithara. 14, sir. The humans are systematically destroying our logistics network. At this rate, our forward bases will run out of ammunition in 30 days. Kextar slammed his fist on the tactical display. "Then we stop playing their game. Order all supply ships to travel with heavy escorts. I want battle cruisers protecting every cargo vessel." But the humans adapted again. Captain Morrison and the Ranger found a convoy protected by 2 battle cruisers and 4 destroyers. Any sane commander would have avoided such a target. Morrison attacked it head-on. "This is insane, Captain," Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez said as they approached the enemy formation. "We can't fight 6 ships at once." Morrison's face was grim. "Amy, do you remember what Captain Harris said before he died? He said to tell Earth we did our duty. Today, we do ours." The Ranger charged straight into the middle of the Zephyrian formation, firing every weapon it had. The ship's armor was torn apart by return fire, but Morrison kept attacking. His final transmission reached every human ship in the system. "Tell Earth, we held the line." The Ranger exploded in a ball of fire, but its sacrifice allowed 2 other human ships to destroy the convoy's cargo vessels. The Zephyrians had won the battle, but they had lost the supplies they needed to continue the war. News of Morrison's death spread through the human fleet like wildfire. The captain who had witnessed the first attack, who had tried to save the New Texas convoy, was gone. But his final words became a battle cry that echoed across human space. "We held the line." The war was changing both sides. Human crews were becoming harder, more ruthless. They didn't retreat when they should. They didn't surrender when defeated. Wounded human ships rammed Zephyrian vessels rather than be captured. Commander Alex Torres exemplified this new human way of fighting. When his ship Falcon was crippled by Zephyrian fire, he could have surrendered. Instead, he ordered his crew to abandon ship, then set the engines to overload and flew the dying vessel into the side of a Zephyrian dreadnought. The explosion tore through both ships, killing Torres and 3,000 Zephyrian warriors. His last message was simple. For the 847, Admiral Kextar was beginning to understand that he was not fighting a normal war. The humans didn't seem to care about their own losses. They cared only about inflicting damage on their enemies. "Sir," Commander Ythara reported, "we're receiving disturbing reports from across the Empire. Human strike teams are appearing behind our lines, sabotaging critical facilities." This was true. Deep in Zephyrian space, teams led by officers like Major Kate Sullivan and Commander Tony Garcia were carrying out missions that seemed impossible. They moved through hostile territory like ghosts, striking at power plants, communication centers, and weapon factories. Major Sullivan's team had destroyed the main ammunition factory on Zephyr Prime. Commander Garcia's Marines had blown up the fuel processing station in the Rigel system. Each attack was perfectly planned and flawlessly executed. "How are they getting past our defenses?" Kextar demanded. Ythara studied her intelligence reports. "Sir, they seem to know exactly where our weak points are. It's as if they have detailed information about every facility in our empire." What she didn't know was that humans had been preparing for this war since the first Zephyrian ship was spotted. Earth's intelligence services had spent weeks mapping every Zephyrian installation, studying every defensive system, and planning attacks on hundreds of targets. Captain Bobby Chen commanded the carrier Independence, one of the few large ships in the human fleet. His job was to launch fighter squadrons against Zephyrian superweapons. It was a job that required sending young pilots to their deaths, and it was killing him inside. "Sir," his wing commander reported, "we've lost another 12 fighters attacking the Zephyrian battle station. The pilots got through the defenses, but the station's still operational." Bobby looked at the tactical display showing the massive Zephyrian weapon platform. It could destroy entire planets, and it had to be stopped. But every attack cost him pilots he couldn't replace. "Launch another wave," he ordered, "and keep launching them until that thing is space dust." The young fighter pilots knew they were flying suicide missions. They knew that Zephyrian defenses were too strong for their small ships. But they also knew that 847 civilians had died at New Texas, and someone had to pay for it. Wave after wave of human fighters threw themselves at Zephyrian targets. 10 fighters would attack a position that should have required 50. Most of them died, but they kept coming. The Zephyrians had never faced an enemy willing to trade 10 ships for one, especially when those 10 ships were crewed by people who had seen the footage of New Texas burning. Admiral Kextar stood in his command center, watching the reports pour in. His empire was being torn apart by an enemy that fought like demons. Every victory cost the humans dearly, but they didn't seem to care. They just kept coming, kept attacking, kept dying for their cause. "Commander," he said to Ythara, "I'm beginning to think we made a terrible mistake." Ythara looked at the casualty reports. The Zephyrian military was bleeding to death in 100 small cuts. "Sir, perhaps we should consider negotiating with the humans." Kextar's laugh was bitter. "Look at what they're doing to us, Commander. Look at how they fight. Do you really think they're interested in talking?" He was right. The humans had moved beyond negotiation. They had tasted Zephyrian blood and they wanted more. The hunt had begun, and it would not end until one side was completely destroyed. The war had been raging for 4 months when Admiral Lisa Carter made the hardest decision of her life. Standing in the command center of her flagship Constitution, she stared at the tactical display showing the Zephyrian home system. 12. Massive defense platforms surrounded the alien capital world, each one capable of destroying 100 human ships. "Ma'am," Colonel Ryan Murphy said quietly, "the casualty reports from the outer battles are coming in. We've lost 60% of our fleet." Lisa closed her eyes for a moment. 60%. That meant thousands of ships and hundreds of thousands of crew members. The human fleet that had once protected 50 star systems was now scattered wreckage across a dozen battlefields. But the Zephyrians had paid an even higher price. Their empire was collapsing. Entire worlds had gone dark as human strike teams destroyed power grids and communication networks. The proud warrior race that had conquered 6 species was being torn apart by humans who refused to give up. "Colonel," Lisa said, "prepare the assault fleet. We're going to end this war today." On the other side of the galaxy, Captain Bobby Chen stood on the bridge of the carrier Independence, watching his fighter squadrons prepare for what everyone knew would be their final mission. The ship showed signs of battle damage from a dozen engagements. Burn marks scarred the hull, and entire sections had been sealed off after taking enemy fire. "Captain," his wing commander, Lieutenant Sarah Davis, approached with a grim expression. "Sir, we have 18 fighters left, that's all. 18. Bobby looked out at the hangar bay where young pilots climbed into ships that were held together with spare parts and determination. These kids had watched their friends die in wave after wave of attacks. They had seen entire squadrons wiped, out in minutes, but they kept flying because 847 people had died at New Texas and someone had to make the aliens pay. "Sarah," Bobby said, "tell the pilots that this is it. One last push, and we can all go home." But they both knew that most of these pilots would never see home again. Admiral Kextar sat in his private quarters aboard the Death's Edge, staring at reports that painted a picture of total disaster. His once mighty empire was dying. The 12 species that had sworn loyalty to the Zephyrians were abandoning their alliance and fleeing to distant star systems. "Admiral," Commander Ythara entered without waiting for permission. Her usual calm was gone, replaced by something close to panic. "Sir, human ships are massing for an assault on the home system. Our scouts report at least 40 vessels approaching. Our outer defenses." Kextar laughed bitterly. 40 ships? We have 12 defense platforms and 100 warships protecting the capital. 40 human vessels cannot threaten us here." "Sir," Ythara said desperately, "these are the same humans who have been destroying our empire for 4 months. They don't fight like any enemy we've ever faced. They don't care about losses. They don't retreat when they should. They just keep coming." Deep in space, the human assault fleet moved toward the Zephyrian home system like a pack of wolves closing in for the kill. Admiral Carter's Constitution led the way, followed by every remaining human warship that could still fight. Some ships were held together with emergency patches. Others had crews of half their normal size because so many people had died in earlier battles. But they were all here for the same reason. The Zephyrians had killed 847 innocent people, and the bill had come due. "All ships," Lisa transmitted to her fleet, "remember why we're here. Remember New Texas. Remember Captain Morrison and the Ranger. Remember every human who died because these aliens thought we were weak." The first human ship to die in the assault was the destroyer Vengeance, commanded by Captain Mike Foster. The Ship charged straight into the defensive fire from 3 Zephyrian platforms, absorbing enough damage to let 2 other vessels slip through the defensive line. Captain Foster's final transmission was heard across the entire human fleet. For the 847, give them hell! The battle for the Zephyrian home system was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships threw themselves at targets that should have been impossible to destroy. The cruiser Defiant rammed a defense platform at full speed, destroying both vessels in an explosion that lit up half the system. Captain Helen Rodriguez commanded the Warrior, one of the newest ships in the human fleet. She watched as vessel after vessel died around her, but she kept pushing forward. The Zephyrians had superior weapons and better armor, but they had never faced an enemy willing to sacrifice everything for victory. "Ma'am," her weapons officer reported, "we're down to 20% power. Hull breaches on decks 4 through 7. We should retreat." Helen looked at the image of the Zephyrian capital world on her screen. Millions of aliens lived there, including the commanders who had ordered the attack on New Texas. "No retreat," she said. "We finished this today." The Warrior joined 3 other human ships in a final assault on the largest defense platform. The Zephyrian weapons tore them apart, but they kept coming. One by one, the human vessels died, but their sacrifice cleared the way for Admiral Carter's Constitution. Lisa stood on her bridge as enemy fire ripped through her ship's armor. The artificial gravity was failing, and smoke filled the air, but she refused to leave her post. Around her, crew members worked frantically to keep the ship fighting even as it died around them. "Admiral," Lieutenant Nina Phillips called from the communications station, "we're receiving surrender offers from the Zephyrian High Command. They want to negotiate." Lisa looked at the tactical display showing the burning wreckage of her fleet. 36 human ships had entered the system. Only 4 were still fighting. But those 4 had broken through the Zephyrian defenses and were closing in on the capital world. "Open a channel to the Zephyrian command," Lisa ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing Admiral Kextar on his bridge. The alien commander looked defeated, his proud bearing replaced by something that might have been fear. "Human Admiral," Kextar said, "we offer you terms. Withdraw your ships, and we will discuss ending this war." Lisa's voice was cold as space itself. "You wanted to see what humans do when you kill our people. You killed 847 civilians without warning, without mercy. Now you know what it costs." The Constitution shuddered as another Zephyrian weapon struck its hull. Emergency lights flickered, and Lisa could hear the sound of escaping atmosphere somewhere in the ship. "Please," Kextar said, and for the first time in the war, he sounded genuinely afraid. "We made a mistake. We didn't understand." "No," Lisa replied. "You understood perfectly. You thought we were weak. You thought we would run. You were wrong." The High Constitution fired its last missiles at the Zephyrian capital's orbital defense grid. The weapons struck home, crippling the system that protected the alien home world. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Zephyrian capital was defenseless. But the victory came at a terrible cost. The Constitution was dying, its hull cracked open, and its engines failing. Admiral Carter stayed at her post even as the ship's atmosphere vented into space, coordinating the final attack that would end the war. Lieutenant Phillips, one of the few survivors, later described how Admiral Carter remained calm even as death approached. "She never stopped fighting," Phillips would tell the investigators. "Even when the ship was breaking apart around us, she kept giving orders, kept pushing forward." The Constitution exploded just as its missiles reached their targets, taking Admiral Carter and 300 crew members with it. But the sacrifice was not in vain. The Zephyrian defense grid was destroyed, their capital world lay open to attack, and their empire was finished. In the wreckage that had once been a proud human fleet, the surviving ships received a transmission from the Zephyrian High Command. It was a simple message broadcast on all frequencies: "We surrender." 6 months after the Zephyrian surrender, Colonel Danny Foster stood on the bridge of the transport ship New Hope as it approached the former Zephyrian capital world. The planet that had once been the center of a mighty empire now looked broken and defeated. Dark spots marked where human missiles had struck orbital stations, and the great cities that had housed millions of aliens were partially in ruins. Danny was now the highest-ranking Marine officer left alive. The war had consumed so many lives that young colonels found themselves commanding entire sectors. He was only 32 years old, but his hair had already turned gray from the stress of occupation duty. "Sir," his aide, Lieutenant Tim Brooks, said quietly, "the Zephyrian Civilian Council is ready to meet with you." Danny nodded and straightened his uniform. The surviving Zephyrians had asked for this meeting to discuss the terms of their surrender. They wanted to understand why humans had fought so viciously, why they had been willing to lose so much to win. The meeting took place in what had once been the Zephyrian High Command Center. The room was huge, designed to intimidate visitors. With its size and grandeur, now it felt empty and sad, like a monument to a dead civilization. 3 Zephyrian civilians waited for him. They were not the proud warriors who had started this war. These were ordinary people, teachers, doctors, engineers, who had been chosen to speak for their broken species. "Colonel Foster," the eldest Zephyrian said in careful English, "I am Physician Korthal. We have come to ask you a question that haunts our people. Why did your species fight so hard? Why did you sacrifice so much?" Danny looked at the alien doctor. Korthal was old, his blue scales faded, and his yellow eyes dim with age. Behind him, the other Zephyrians waited nervously for an answer that might help them understand what had happened to their world. "Doctor," Danny said, "you killed 847 of our people without warning. Did you think we would just forget about them?" "But the cost," another Zephyrian said desperately. "Your species lost hundreds of thousands of lives. Entire fleets were destroyed. Worlds were evacuated. How could revenge be worth such a price?" Danny was quiet for a long moment. He thought about Admiral Carter, who had died leading the final assault. He thought about Captain Morrison and the crew of the Ranger. He thought about all the young pilots who had flown suicide missions against impossible odds. "It wasn't revenge," he finally said. "It was justice, and there is no price too high when it comes to protecting our own." Across the galaxy, the human colonies were slowly recovering from the war. On New Earth, Captain Helen Rodriguez walked through a military cemetery where thousands of white markers stretched toward the horizon. Each marker bore the name of someone who had died fighting the Zephyrians. Helen was the daughter of Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, who had died aboard the Ranger with Captain Morrison. She now commanded one of the few remaining Earth vessels, the cruiser Phoenix. The ship was one of only 40 human warships left from a fleet that had once numbered in the hundreds. "Ma'am," her first officer, Commander Paul Adams, said as he joined her among the graves, "we've received new orders from Earth Command. They want us to patrol the outer colonies. Make sure the remaining Zephyrian groups don't cause trouble." Helen nodded, still looking at the endless rows of graves. "Paul, Do you think it was worth it? All these people dead, our fleet destroyed, entire worlds abandoned. Was it worth it to defeat them? Paul was quiet for a moment. He had lost his brother in the war, killed when his ship was destroyed attacking a Zephyrian supply base. Ma'am, I think about what would have happened if we hadn't fought. They killed 847 people just to test our response. What would they have done if we had shown weakness? How many more would have died? On Earth, General Carl Thompson sat in his office writing his final report on the war. He was one of the few senior officers who had survived the conflict, and it was his job to explain to future generations what had happened and why. Thompson was 60 years old, a career soldier who had served in 3 different wars before the Zephyrians attacked. But nothing had prepared him for the scale of destruction that the alien war had brought to humanity. He wrote carefully, choosing each word with precision. The Zephyrian Empire made a fundamental error in judgment. They believed that humans would calculate the cost of war and choose to submit rather than fight. They were wrong. We calculated the cost, accepted it, and paid it in full. The numbers told the story of that payment. The human fleet had been reduced from 200 ships to 40. 60% of Earth's military personnel were dead or missing. 12 colonies had been completely evacuated. The economic cost would take decades to recover from. But the Zephyrian Empire no longer existed. Their 12-species alliance had collapsed when the war ended. Most of the alien races had fled to distant star systems, wanting nothing to do with the species that had provoked humanity's wrath. The Zephyrians themselves were reduced to a few million survivors on their home world, their military caste extinct, and their proud warrior culture destroyed. Admiral Kextar had not survived the final battle. He had died aboard the Death's Edge, when human fighters broke through his defenses. Commander Yathara was one of the few Zephyrian military officers still alive, and she spent her days helping the civilian government understand the terms of surrender. She often thought about the warnings in the old Galactic Council records, the ones that Admiral Kextar had dismissed as propaganda. The Terrans follow one rule above all others: harm their own, and they will pursue you to the edge of existence itself. Now she understood what those words meant. The humans had literally pursued the Zephyrians to the edge of existence, and they had not stopped until their enemies were completely broken. On Luna Base, the memorial to the war's victims was finally completed. It was a simple black wall with 847 names carved into the stone, the civilians who had died in the New Texas convoy attack. Below the names was a single inscription: "They started this, we finished it." The cost was acceptable. Thousands of people came to see the memorial every day. Many were family members of those who had died in the war. Others were simply citizens who wanted to understand what their species had sacrificed. Lieutenant Nina Phillips, one of the few survivors of Admiral Carter's final assault, often visited the memorial. She had been promoted to captain and given command of a new ship, but she still felt the weight of everything that had been lost. "Do you ever regret it?" a young reporter asked her during one visit. "All the death, all the destruction. Do you ever wish we had found another way?" Nina looked at the names carved in black stone. 847 innocent people who had died simply because they were human and in the wrong place at the wrong time. "No," she said quietly. "They killed our people without warning, without mercy. They thought we were weak. They learned otherwise." The reporter pressed further. "But the cost was so high. Surely there must have been some other option. Nina turned to face the young man. He was maybe 25. Too young to have fought in the war. Too young to understand what it meant to lose friends. To an enemy who showed no mercy. The cost was high, she agreed. But it was acceptable. Because now every species in the galaxy knows one thing about humanity. We protect our own, no matter what it costs us. As the years passed, the story of the human-Zephyrian War spread throughout the galaxy. It became a cautionary tale that parents told their children, a reminder of what happened when you underestimated the species from Earth. The few surviving Zephyrians never forgot the lesson they had learned. They told anyone who would listen about the humans who had sacrificed their entire fleet to protect 847 civilians. They spoke of Admiral Carter, who had stayed at her post as her ship died around her. They remembered Captain Morrison, who had charged into impossible odds rather than let an enemy escape unpunished. And in the depths of space, where new species were just beginning to explore the stars, the message was clear. There was one rule that every intelligent race learned eventually. Never mess with Earth's fleet, because the humans will always pay whatever price is necessary to make you regret it. The war was over, but its lesson would last forever. 20 years after the war ended, Ambassador Sarah Williams stood on the observation deck of the diplomatic station Harmony, watching as alien ships from across the galaxy gathered for the first interstellar peace conference. The station floated, in neutral space, far from any world that might claim ownership of the historic meeting. Sarah was 45 years old and had spent her entire adult life in diplomatic service. But she was also the daughter of Captain Mike Williams, who had died in the final assault on the Zephyrian home system. The war had shaped her life in ways she was still discovering. Ambassador, her aide Marcus Chen said as he approached. The Altarian delegation has arrived. They're requesting a private meeting before the conference begins. Sarah nodded, watching the sleek Altarian vessels dock with the station. The Altarians were a proud species, known for their advanced technology and military strength. They had been expanding their territory for the past decade, and some smaller species were growing worried. The meeting took place in Conference Room 7, a neutral space decorated with symbols from dozens of different worlds. Fleet Commander Zethara of the Altarian Republic entered with 4 of his senior officers. They were tall, elegant beings with silver skin and large black eyes that seemed to see everything. Ambassador Williams, Zethara said in perfect English, we appreciate this opportunity to speak privately. The Altarian Republic has great respect for human diplomatic skills. Sarah smiled politely, but she could sense tension in the alien commander's voice. Thank you, Commander. How can Earth help you today? Zethara exchanged glances with his officers before continuing. Ambassador, we have heard stories about the human-Zephyrian conflict. Old tales of how your species responded to an attack on your civilians. We wanted to understand if these stories are true. Sarah kept her expression neutral. She had expected this question. Every new species that made contact with humanity eventually asked about the war. The historical records are available if you wish to study them, Commander. What specifically interests you? The scale of your response, one of Zethara's officers said bluntly. The records suggest that humans sacrificed their entire fleet to avenge the deaths of less than 1,000 civilians. This seems excessive. Sarah was quiet for a moment. She thought about her father, who had volunteered for the suicide mission that broke the Zephyrian defenses. She thought about the memorial on Earth with 847 names carved in black stone. "Commander," she said finally, "those 847 people were not just numbers. They were farmers and teachers, parents and children. They were killed without warning by an enemy who thought humanity was too weak to respond. We proved them wrong." Zethara leaned forward in his chair. "But the cost, Ambassador? Your species lost hundreds of thousands of military personnel. Your fleet was nearly destroyed. Entire colonies were abandoned. How could any victory be worth such a price?" Sarah studied the alien commander's face. She could see calculation in his black eyes, as if he was trying to determine whether humans would respond the same way to future threats. "Commander," she said quietly, "are you planning to attack human civilians?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Zethara's officers shifted uncomfortably, and she could see that her directness had caught them off guard. "Of course not," Zethara said quickly. "The Altarian Republic seeks peaceful relations with all species. We were simply curious about human military doctrine." "Our doctrine is simple," Sarah replied. "Leave our people alone, and we'll leave yours alone. Harm them, and we'll do whatever it takes to make you regret it." On the other side of the galaxy, Captain Tommy Rodriguez commanded the patrol ship Vigilant as it investigated reports of pirate activity near the Kepler colonies. Tommy was the son of Amy Rodriguez, who had died aboard the Ranger 20 years ago. He had grown up hearing stories about the war, but he had never experienced combat himself. "Captain," his tactical officer, Lieutenant Jane Parker, reported, "we're detecting 3 ships of unknown configuration approaching the merchant vessel Golden Dream. They're not responding to identification requests." Tommy studied his displays. The 3 ships were moving in attack formation, closing fast on the defenseless cargo vessel. Pirates had become bolder in recent years, taking advantage of humanity's reduced fleet strength. "All hands, battle stations," Tommy ordered. "Jane, try to contact those ships. Tell them to back off immediately." The response came in the form of weapons fire. The 3 pirate vessels opened fire on the Golden Dream, crippling its engines and preparing to board. Tommy realized he was facing the same choice that had confronted human commanders during the war: risk everything to protect innocent lives, or calculate the odds and retreat. "Sir," his first officer commander, Lisa Hayes, said urgently, "those ships are heavily armed. We're outgunned 3-1. Standard procedure would be to call for reinforcements." Tommy looked at the Golden Dream on his screen. The cargo ship carried 200 civilians, including families moving to the frontier colonies. If he waited for help, those people would be dead or enslaved by the time reinforcements arrived. "Lisa," he said, "my mother died protecting a convoy just like this one. She didn't wait for reinforcements." The Vigilant charged into battle against impossible odds. Tommy used every trick he had learned from studying the war records, dancing between enemy ships and striking at their weak points. The pirates had expected an easy victory against a single human patrol ship. Instead, they found themselves fighting a captain who had inherited his mother's determination. The battle lasted 15 minutes. When it was over, 2 pirate ships were destroyed, and the 3rd was fleeing toward deep space. The Vigilant was badly damaged, but the Golden Dream and its 200 passengers were safe. News of the battle spread quickly through human space and beyond. Once again, a human commander had risked everything to protect civilians. The story reminded the galaxy that even 20 years after the war, humans were still willing to pay any price to defend their own. Back on the diplomatic station, Ambassador Sarah Williams received a priority message about the pirate attack. She read the report while Commander Zethara and his officers waited for her response to their earlier questions. "Commander," she said, setting down the message pad, "I just received news that one of our patrol ships destroyed 2 pirate vessels that were attacking a civilian convoy. The captain was outnumbered 3-1, but he attacked anyway. Does that answer your question about human military doctrine?" Zethara's silver skin seemed to pale slightly. "Ambassador, we had no connection to those pirates. The Altarian Republic does not support such activities." "I'm sure you don't," Sarah said calmly. "But the galaxy is full of species that prey on the weak. They need to understand that as long as humans are around, there will always be someone willing to fight for innocent people, no matter what the odds." The Altarian commander nodded slowly. "The stories are true, then. Humans really will sacrifice everything to protect their civilians." "Every single time," Sarah confirmed. "That's what we learned from the Zephyrians. They thought we would calculate the cost and choose to submit. They were wrong then, and anyone who makes the same mistake will be wrong now." The peace conference began the next day with delegates from 47 different species. During the opening ceremony, a moment of silence was observed for all those who had died in interstellar conflicts. Sarah thought about the 847 names on the memorial back on Earth, and about her father who had died to avenge them. The legacy of the human Zephyrian War lived on, not just in memorial stones and history books, but in the actions of every human who chose to fight for what was right, regardless of the cost. 20 years later, the galaxy still remembered the lesson. Never underestimate a species that values honor over survival and justice over safety. The legend would continue as long as humans drew breath among the stars. 30 years after the Zephyrian War ended, Fleet Admiral Rebecca Carter stood in the command center of the rebuilt Earth Defense Force headquarters. She was the daughter of the legendary Admiral Lisa Carter, who had died in the final assault that broke the alien empire. Rebecca had grown up in the shadow of her mother's sacrifice, and now she faced a crisis that would test everything humanity had learned from that terrible conflict. "Ma'am," Intelligence Director Colonel Frank Miller approached her desk with a classified report. "We've confirmed the worst-case scenario. The Dominion is real, and they're coming." Rebecca took the report and read it carefully. For months, Earth's deep space sensors had been picking up strange signals from beyond the galactic rim. Ships moving in formation, communication patterns. That suggested a massive military force, and most disturbing of all, evidence that this new enemy had been studying human tactics from the Zephyrian War. The Corvani Dominion was unlike any threat humanity had faced before. Intelligence reports suggested they commanded a fleet of over 2,000 warships and had already conquered dozens of star systems on the far side of the galaxy. Unlike the Zephyrians, who had attacked out of arrogance, the Corvani were methodical, careful, and they had learned from the mistakes of others. "Colonel," Rebecca said, "what's our current fleet strength?" 67 active warships, Admiral. We've been rebuilding steadily since the war, but we're still only a third of our pre-war strength." Rebecca nodded grimly. 67 ships against 2,000. The math was even worse than what her mother had faced 30 years ago. But there was something else that worried her more than the numbers. "Sir," her aide, Captain Martin Davis, said quietly, "there's something else. The Corvani sent a message. They want to meet with human representatives under a flag of truce." This was unexpected. The Zephyrians had never bothered with diplomacy. They had simply attacked and expected humanity to surrender. The fact that the Corvani wanted to talk suggested they understood what had happened to the last aliens who had threatened Earth. The meeting took place on the neutral trading station Deep Haven, located in the empty space between human and Corvani territory. Rebecca arrived with a small diplomatic escort, but she knew that hundreds of Corvani ships were waiting just beyond the system's edge. Supreme Commander Vex Thul of the Corvani Dominion was waiting for her in the station's main conference room. He was a massive creature, nearly 3 meters tall, with gray skin like armor plating and 4 arms that ended in clawed hands. His species had evolved for war, and it showed in every line of his body. "Admiral Carter," Vex Thul said in heavily accented English, "I am honored to meet the daughter of the famous Lisa Carter. Your mother's reputation is known throughout this galaxy." Rebecca kept her expression neutral. "Commander Vex Thul, I understand. You wanted to discuss something with us." The alien commander gestured to his aide, who activated a holographic display showing the local star systems. Human colonies appeared as blue dots, while Corvani forces were marked in red. The display made it clear that the Dominion had humanity completely surrounded. "Admiral," Vex Thul said, "the Corvani Dominion is expanding into this region of space. We have studied your species extensively, including your conflict with the Zephyrian Empire. We understand that humans are formidable opponents." Rebecca studied the tactical display. The Corvani had positioned their fleets to cut off all escape routes from human space. If they attacked, there would be nowhere for civilian populations to run. "What exactly are you proposing, Commander?" she asked. "Surrender," Vex Thul said simply. "Your colonies will be incorporated into the Dominion. Your people will be relocated to designated worlds where they can live peaceful lives under our protection. In exchange, there will be no war, no destruction, no unnecessary death." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. The offer was more generous than anything the Zephyrians had proposed. The Corvani were essentially offering to let humanity survive as a client species within their empire. "And if we refuse?" she asked. Vex Thul's expression grew serious. "Then we will take your worlds by force. Admiral, I have studied the records of your war with the Zephyrians. I know what your species is capable of when threatened. But I also know the cost. You lost hundreds of thousands of people defeating an enemy with a fraction of our strength. Against the full might of the Dominion, the price of resistance would be the extinction of your entire species." Rebecca looked at the holographic display again. The alien commander was right about the numbers. Humanity could not win a conventional war against the Corvani Dominion. The question was whether they would choose survival as slaves or death as free people. "Commander," she said finally, "I need to consult with my government. How long are you willing to wait for an answer?" 72 hours, Vex Thul replied. "After that, we begin our advance whether you agree or not." Back on Earth, the emergency session of the World Council was unlike anything in human history. Representatives from every colony, every military unit, and every civilian organization gathered to decide the fate of their species. General Carl Thompson, now in his 80s but still sharp as a blade, spoke for the military. "Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot win this war. The enemy has us outnumbered 30-1, and they've had decades to study our tactics. If we fight, we will lose everything." President Maria Santos, the elected leader of the human colonies, stood to address the assembly. "General Thompson is correct about the military situation. But we need to consider what surrender really means. The Corvani are offering us survival, but at the cost of our freedom and independence." Representative Jack Morrison, the grandson of the captain who had died at New Texas, rose to speak. "My grandfather died defending a convoy of civilians. My Father served in the rebuilding efforts after the war. Everything our family has sacrificed was for the idea that humans should be free to choose their own destiny. The debate continued for 18 hours. Some argued for acceptance of the Corvani terms, pointing out that survival was better than extinction. Others demanded resistance, claiming that freedom was worth any price. Finally, President Santos called for a vote. The question was simple: accept Corvani rule or fight for independence, knowing that defeat meant the end of human civilization. The vote was not even close. By a margin of 847 to 12, the representatives chose to fight. Admiral Rebecca Carter received the decision while still aboard Deep Haven Station. She requested one final meeting with Supreme Commander Vex Thul, knowing it would be the last peaceful conversation between their species. "Commander," she said as they met again in the conference room, "humanity has made its decision. We respectfully decline your offer." Vex Thul's expression showed what might have been sadness. "Admiral, you are condemning your entire species to death. There is no shame in choosing survival over meaningless resistance." Rebecca thought about her mother, who had died leading the final assault on the Zephyrian homeworld. She thought about Captain Morrison and the crew of the Ranger. She thought about the 847 civilians whose deaths had started the last war. "Commander," she said, 30 years ago, aliens killed 847 of our people and expected us to accept it. We chose to fight instead, even though it cost us nearly everything. Today, you're asking us to give up our freedom to save our lives. We're making the same choice we made then." Vex Thul stood and gathered his aides. "Then you have chosen extinction, Admiral. I am sorry it has come to this." As the Corvani delegation left the station, Rebecca sent a message to every human ship and colony in the galaxy. The message was simple. They have asked us to choose between freedom and safety. We choose freedom. Prepare for war. The Second Interstellar War was about to begin, and this time, humanity would face an enemy that had learned from the Zephyrians' mistakes. The test would determine whether the human spirit could survive even when victory was impossible.